Welcome to the Sourcing Hero podcast, produced by Una, a group purchasing organization that empowers sourcing heroes, and Art of Procurement, the world's largest procurement podcast network. I'm your host, Kelly Barner. The goal of the Sourcing Hero podcast is to capture the epic stories of people who are rising up and beating the odds to create exceptional value within procurement, directly from those heroes themselves. Today, my guest here on the Sourcing Hero podcast is Rohit Hajela. Rohit started his career working in product development, and over time, that evolved into vendor management roles in procurement. Today, he continues that work, and he has also co-founded a business called Vendor Management Office that helps track third-party technology vendors. So, hello, Rohit. How are you?
Hi, Kelly. I'm doing really well. Thank you so much for asking and having me here.
So I shared very, very high level about your background in my intro, but what else about your professional journey would you like people to know?
Kelly, speaking broadly about my profile, I started my career in 2000, and for the next 10 years, I worked in sales. And it was mostly enterprise sales. I've been in technology and telecom domain mostly during those years. And then I switched to a product development role, as you described earlier. I spent about 2 years in product development, and I'm currently working with TD Bank as a vendor manager. Within the bank, I've held different roles. I started with infrastructure technology, then I moved to supporting another line of business within the bank. Internally it's called Enterprise Protect, but it's more around cybersecurity. And currently I'm supporting the fraud line of business. So that's the overall profile. On the other hand, as you said, I have a website called vendormanagementoffice.net where we regularly post some interesting stuff around how to manage your technology vendors, how to manage technology risk, any latest happening around your suppliers, anything that is in public media, news articles. We post all of that so that you can the readers can take a conscious decisions. And we also have another platform called procurement.ai, where we're building software to manage technology vendors into it.
Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about risk in a minute, but first I just want to ask you, because I'm always interested in hearing people's stories behind this, what made you decide to become an entrepreneur?
So I've been in vendor management role since last more than 7 years now, and I've seen a shift happening over the last many years from just being a cost saving shop to basically getting integrated with the business and supporting the line of business in making sure that they stay resilient. There are no interruptions, and we are playing an active role in managing risk for them. And risks can come from any direction, but largely speaking, our role is now evolved, and now cost saving, although it's still on the plate, we are now managing risk from governance and compliance perspective as well. So I think this role is going to further evolve, and the vendor managers will play further active role in supporting the business. But in future, I think the vendor, the supply, basically the supply and sourcing managers and the vendor managers and people in this community will play a very strategic role in making sure in the success of any organization. Even CEOs are now paying attention to to this community, from the sense, they're recognizing that, we have to deal with third party suppliers, either because, we don't have those capabilities today, and we need those capabilities from those third party suppliers, or maybe we just don't have resources or time and money, and maybe it's not our core expertise to do certain things which we outsource. So eventually, third-party suppliers are going to play a major role in the success of any organization, including improving their competitive positioning. So people who are going to manage those relationships are going to be really, really critical in ensuring the success of any enterprise. So long answer short, I'm seeing a lot of shift happening in this space. The next wave of innovation will come in this space. There are so many changes that are happening in the technology space, and so I see a lot of opportunity for growth, a lot of opportunity for collaboration, innovation that will eventually help a lot of organizations in achieving the success that I defined earlier.
And it's interesting because so much of the shift in procurement's focus has been decided for us. We've had all of these disruptive events and levels of uncertainty, and we've had to accommodate those in order to both continue managing supplier relationships and continuing to address costs. But risk has become an increasingly large part of procurement's focus. If we narrow the enormous world of risk that we all live in, specifically to IT, what are some of the risks that companies open themselves up to if they're not actively managing their IT providers?
So I think the biggest threat that that surround us and every other organization, whether it is regulated, non-regulated, whether it is IT, non-IT, is the cybersecurity risk. Uh, Ransomware being the largest risk within cybersecurity. I was reading a research, and it said cybersecurity costed the world $20 billion in 2021, and by 2031, it is going to rise up to $265 billion. So it's a huge cost, and this is going to this is continuing to haunt every cybersecurity expert, CISOs, CIOs, because that's a significant risk that the organizations are opening itself to. Average ransomware cost for every organization is around $220,000. If you get if you get hacked, it's I mean the ransomware cost itself is not the biggest cost. I'm sorry, I'll repeat my phrase, what I just said. So ransomware is one of the biggest costs, but there are other associated costs that come with it. So tomorrow, if you get affected, then you're also facing downtime. You're also losing a lot of money in lost opportunities. Ransomware removal cost, recovery expenses. And then any money that is lost in manpower, right? All those man hours that are lost. So it's a huge challenge, huge cost, and then then you are then you're prone and open to compliance risk, privacy risk. So there is a huge impact out there which happens as a result of cyber risk. So
I guess
think
so.
that's
Those numbers are enormous.
Absolutely.
Now, when you and I spoke previously, you had actually talked about sort of a multi-stage process for companies that are looking to bring their IT contracts under management, and hopefully thwart some of these costs associated with cybersecurity, ransomware. Take me through sort of the two stages. So I think you talked about like a day one versus a day two, at least in the abstract. What should that process look like?
So I would say every organization is different, and they have different sourcing processes, as I would like to call it, or third-party management processes. Typically, day one to me is when when you're buying something, or you're negotiating a contract, just getting vendor on board, and then you're taking a look at the associated risks. You're doing the risk assessments on what this vendor is doing, and how is it helping the organization. What kind of data would it have access to? If they have access to any data, what are they doing with it? Whether it is stored on cloud, whether it is on-prem, and if they have access to the data, then how are they protecting it? So you do all these due diligence items during the negotiation phase, and once you sign the contract, the day two kicks in, where now the focus is on managing that relationship. And so when it comes to managing that relationship, there has to be a continuous monitoring of that relationship from performance. So is the supplier meeting the SLA requirements? Is the supplier complying with all the contractual requirements? So if the supplier was supposed to provide us a software report on an X date, did the supplier provide the software on an X date? If they did, then did we internally review it? Are there any additional risks that need to be mitigated? Right? Have they provided us insurance certificates? Right? Did they conduct a disaster recovery test? For high risk vendors, it is usually a requirement for the vendor to conduct the disaster recovery test on an annual basis. So you need to track all that information. And if there are any risks found or any exposure to anything, that then you need to capture that and discuss internally and make sure that you reduce or mitigate that risk.
Now, when you and I spoke previously, I can remember admitting something to you, and I admit it again in this audience because I have a feeling there are a lot of people listening in that have found themselves in the exact same place. And that is being in procurement. It's very common to be involved in sourcing projects to select apps, software, whether enterprise or something a little bit more limited. And we always have this really nice data security, info security, IT security, we'll call it what you like, questionnaire in the RFP. And it's got a lot of questions in it. And IT has signed off on those questions. And when it comes time to evaluate providers, we make sure dutifully that questionnaire is included in the RFP. And then when the responses come back, we take that section of the RFP and we package it up nicely. And then in most cases, absolutely nothing happens with it. So we're collecting the information, but we're not necessarily acting on it. How can procurement use this moment in our processes to find another opportunity to evaluate and mitigate risk?
That's a great question, Kelly. And I think procurement plays a very critical and crucial role when you're doing RFPs or negotiating contracts. And procurement is the single function that talks to all people. And procurement is also a relationship builder within the organization. So usually, the way I would handle it is, I would create relationships with multiple stakeholders within my organization. I will speak to, so for example, if you're talking about, cybersecurity and, the security questionnaire, I would go back to my cybersecurity team and say, hey, this is the contract we are negotiating. This was the questionnaire, this was the standard question or a customized questionnaire, which was sent to the supplier. These are the responses. Can you just take a look from your lens and see if, if anything stands out? Are we covering our risk appropriately? Is there anything that you want us to negotiate with the supplier? Any change in terms and conditions? Any additional controls that you want to put in place to protect organization's data? So you need to secure those and solidify those relationships with multiple stakeholders internally. Large organizations will have multiple teams who may have to review it. Legal team may review it. Your sourcing team may review it. Your cybersecurity team may review it. Your information security team may review it. Your privacy team, if there is one, then they may review it. So everyone, you need to go back to everyone and see, okay, tell them that this is what we have, and please review it and provide us feedback. And then you take that feedback, and you put that those action items in action. You go back to the supplier and say, this is the feedback you got, can make these changes. And that's how you incorporate those changes in the contract. Remember, once the contract is signed, then that becomes your Bible. And the vendor will behave, act, and respond based on what's written in the contract. It will become very, very hard, to ask the vendor to do something which is not written in the contract. So your best bet and your best chance in a high performance contract, in crafting and signing a high performance contract, is to, do your due diligence, make the right connection with your stakeholders, get them to review it, and include as many clauses and as many conditions and as many controls as possible in the contract, so that tomorrow, you're covered from the perspective of the risk.
Now, given all of your experience with vendor management, one last question on this topic I want to ask you. We've talked a lot. You yourself mentioned relationships. Procurement sometimes talk about partnerships. When we think about collaborating with our suppliers, I think sometimes maybe there's a disconnect between what we envision and what it actually looks like in practice. So I'd be interested to get your point of view. What would you say that truly collaborative suppliers look like, regardless of the category of spend that we're talking about?
Yeah, regardless of the spend category, I think the ideal supplier relationship is where you're taking care of their interest as well. It's not a one-way street. There is a reason why we call them partners, because they are actually the partners to your success. So in order to get some, you need to give some as well. So you need to work collaboratively with them. You need to listen to what are their challenges, and you need to help them somehow in your capacity, so that they can achieve what they want to, and in return, hopefully they will comply with your requirements. An ideal relationship is going to be a two-way relationship. It's not a one-way relationship, and you need to build that relationship. It can't be done overnight. I've been in relationships which were sour for some reason, and it took me a lot of time and nurturing that relationship. That after some time, it eventually became a collaborative relationship, and led to a successful supplier supplier management program.
So, Rohit, as we start to wind down our time together, I want to give you the opportunity to answer your choice of one of the two following questions. This is part of being a guest on The Sourcing Hero. So your choice is, what does the idea of a sourcing hero mean to you? Or a broader way of looking at the same idea is, what do you think heroism looks like in a business context? You can choose either one of those questions.
So I would choose, the question on, the heroism. How does heroism? What does heroism sound like in procurement, right? So as I mentioned earlier, right, we are living in the future already, and there is a lot of change that is happening around us, and the change is is happening at a very high speed rate. There are supplier related, issues and challenges. We talked about the cybersecurity, threats, and there are so many suppliers, and the ransomware gangs also, target a lot of third party, suppliers, because that's an easier target for them. From governance and compliance perspective, it becomes very important to make sure that you're covering the risk. But given the state we are in, and given the change that that revolves around us, this a supplier, a procurement hero will be a person or a team of people who will understand what are the changes that are happening around us. There is a lot of changes that are happening in robotic process automation, virtualization. We're talking about metaverse. We're talking about artificial intelligence. We're talking about distributed architecture, hybrid cloud, software 2.0, zero trust architecture. So there's a lot of information out there. So this person or a team of people who will understand, all these moving pieces, tie them together, and enable a journey for their own organization to a future world of procurement, which will be very futuristic, very very advanced. And remember, there is no end to it. You may decide that okay, this is where we are today, and this is where we want to be. Once you start this journey today to achieve what you want to achieve in maybe 3 years or 5 years down the line, the entire dynamic might change again, because again, because the change is so rapid. It's by the time you reach your end goal after 5 years, things will change again, and then you'll be thinking about something else. So I think it's a continuous improvement journey from now until there is no end to that journey. It's a continuous improvement journey. So that team will, or that person who understand that it's a continuous improvement journey, and make sure that the organization is set up in a way that all these changes are understood, and there are steps that are being taken to take the organization to the next level. So that is a person who will, in my opinion, will be the real procurement hero, who transforms the procurement organization in their organization, to make sure that their organization is successful and resilient.
Well, and I appreciate your point about we're living in the future already. I think, as you've said, the rate of change is accelerating. And the more we can think of ourselves as sort of living beyond our present moment, I think the more effective we can be. And hopefully, we started out talking about risk, but a lot of times when we talk about risk, we actually mean unexpected changes that aren't necessarily disruptions. And so the extent to which we can expand our awareness and be thinking a little bit beyond where we thought we were going to be in this moment certainly gives us an opportunity to ward off some of the negative downsides that can accompany risk if we're not prepared. So, Rohit, I want to thank you for joining me and ask you one last question. If people have listened into this conversation and would like to learn more or would like to connect with you directly, what is the best way for them to get in touch?
So I'm very active on LinkedIn, and anyone who wants to connect or follow me is free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And I'm very responsive on LinkedIn. So if you have any further questions, or want to speak with me or connect with me, I'm happy to do that.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for sharing your time and experience and being with me here today on the Sourcing Hero podcast.
Thank you for inviting me, Kelly, and it was a pleasure speaking with you. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast. Join us again next time for more true stories of sourcing and business heroism performed by your colleagues and peers. Look for the Sourcing Hero wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe. Finally, don't forget, sourcing heroism is taking place all around us every day. Keep your eyes open and you're bound to see it. Until next time, I'm your host, Kelly Barner. Stay well and always remember that you can be a hero too.